And so, like, I mean, what are you talking 7 months now, but at the time of recording in primary headship? Is there anything that it's taught you or revealed to you about the relationship between systems, culture, and improvement in general?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah. I guess one thing I've learned is that you can't enjoy the culture that you profess to value and desire if people are struggling with high workload or what they feel is arbitrary tasks within their workload. Because you can create like a nice, smiley, open atmosphere. Like I'm pretty confident that I'm quite good at walking around a school, being warm and open, listening to people, setting the kind of temperature. You make the weather kind of thing. I'm pretty sure I'm okay at that kind of stuff, or I put a lot of effort into doing that, even though it's quite tiring and training to do that. But none of that really counts for very much if your teachers smile at you and feel like you're a nice person, and then they go back and they're like, "Oh, he makes me put my data into 15 different spreadsheets, and I have to itemize every spelling mark in this for every single member of my class, and end up putting in 300 bits of data, or he makes me tick and flick with my books every single day so that every piece of work is seen and marked by a teacher, yada, yada, yada." So I guess what I've learned is and I was a bit blind to all the processes and systems that are maybe historical in the primary sector. So like bookmarking and approach to data in my school was like revelatory to me because I feel like in the secondary sector, and maybe this is true of a lot of primaries as well, but we've kind of canned bookmarking and we've canned unnecessary data drops and that sort of stuff. But I've talking to primary leaders, that still seems to be a cultural thing that goes on in a few places at least. So I was thinking, okay, well, I've got to truly set the weather and make the weather at my school. I've got to start peeling back unnecessary work tasks that the teachers are doing. And the marking policy, we changed it, we ripped it all up and called it the feedback policy, and the word marking's kind of barely in there. And we amalgamated the data into one place, and it's only a termly data drop instead of every 6 weeks across 15 spreadsheets. And so I think you can't enjoy the sort of rich, flourishing culture while people are doing arbitrary work that doesn't. The phrase that I use is like, is the juice worth the squeeze? So the hour that took you to do that, did that have an impact on your teaching or the children's learning? And if it didn't, then we've got to find a way to get rid of that. So yeah, it's a really good question, Kieran, because I don't think you can enjoy like a flourishing culture that's purposeful if people feel like they're doing work in the background that doesn't contribute to that mission. So I've definitely learned a lot about how we kind of manage that. And right, if we're going to do this initiative, we're going to launch. I don't know. We've launched these. Everyone makes fun of my trust because instead of teaching and learning, we call it learning and teaching. So we've just launched some learning and teaching principles for our school, which are great. I really believe in them. We're going through lots of evidence-informed approaches and videos to see to codify how that will look in our school. But I was aware before we launched that we had to take more things away. Otherwise, this is going to become another additional initiative that no one can fit in. So we have to look at like what can we do differently to give people the energy and the headspace to actually implement that properly in their classroom. So it's things like that. So that's really, really helped that approach of like, what can we take away? What can we reduce in order to lay something in you and create that culture where everyone feels like they're part of something that's manageable and also hopefully inspiring and warm as well.
That's amazing. So you've just gone in and you've just scythed all that stuff, all the sort of stuff that we do that's not necessarily driven by evidence, but driven by bureaucracy from a bygone
I
age. And
think, I mean, I
was it a
can't
big
profess to
cheer?
have done this all on my own. It's like it's a team effort, and I've learned everyone around me. I mean, I've been asking so many questions all year about why do we do this? Why do we do this? But I think it's almost good coming from a secondary background into the primary and vice versa, because I've been able to go, well, why would you do that? And everyone's kind of, will either tell me why or go, yeah, we're not really sure. It's kind of a thing that we've always done. So I think it's my ignorance has actually driven some things that we've done because people have been able to kind of educate me and not me them, but I've been able to sort of poke holes in things just through my sheer ignorance rather than so some of it I think we've just happened on by accident and yeah, so I think it's going okay so far. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I think quite often there could be a fear of we've always done this. What happens if we don't do this? And particularly as accountability rises again within the sector, um, and if head teachers see, oh look, we're not using written feedback in all of our lessons, and the school hasn't collapsed and stuff, and do you have plans to write blogs about this and stuff? Because I think that's the message that head teachers need to, or school leaders need to hear, is that the world doesn't end if you drop some of these sort of less effective but pretty ingrained. Because you say, oh, these are still common in a few places. I would hazard they're common in most places, and it's only the within the little sort of evidence informed bubble, because that it's smaller within primary than it even within secondary.
Mm.
I think that message needs to get out there. So, do you have any plans to share your experience of like these practicalities? Because I think they're really important.
Yeah, I still feel like a total fraud sitting in the primary chair, So actually, I haven't even thought about writing a blog about some lessons learned from primary, because I still just feel like who am I to maybe I will from more of a general leadership perspective. But yeah, the primary, I still think I'm still a novice and an amateur, so I'd feel really difficult to to sort of get on my high horse about that.
I mean, but that's the kind of imposter syndrome that most primary teachers and leaders feel
Mm.
anyway. I think so. I mean, you could always like Shan Doherty. I bet you she would co-author with you, and she could almost fact check and say, yeah, I agree with that, because she's obviously living the deputy head dream in Tunbridge Wells at the moment. So I bet you she's got quite a
Mm-hmm.
bit of a similar story to share. But obviously,
Yeah.
I'm not going to force you to write these blogs.
No, I'd definitely be interested in doing it. And it is really interesting. And when it comes to things like the accountability measures you mentioned, I think one of the things is I'm hoping that this still carries on in current inspections, but it's like the people who are measuring whatever you're doing, your kind of provision. My line's always been, well, if we do what our policy says, and we've got a clear rationale for why we do it, we can prove that it works, and we're all doing it in a similar way, then you can't really pick a hole in that. So this is, goes back to when we were talking about relaunching our marking policy as a school. Was that okay? Well, here, we've provided a clear evidence base on our policy. We know that it's manageable. It means that what we're saying in the policy, actually all the kids are getting, and we can see it evidently from when we go around lessons and observe lessons. And then fine. Like, we don't need to do things the old way, because we're proving that we're consistent in what we do now, and it's in our policy, and we're sticking to our policy. So I think sometimes it's just getting over that fear of like, what will the inspectors say?
Yeah, which is I think reasonable. But it's been a little bit braver, isn't it, and pushing forward. I mean, what was the staff reaction to those almost this subtractive process that did they realize that was happening around them, or did they have they sort of almost realized the benefits a couple of months later when they thought actually things are a bit better now, or we've got more time for X, Y, and Z? I mean, I don't want to guess, but what's their reaction been?
I'm really lucky. I've got a very, very positive, open staff team. So I think they would back me and go for it, even if they thought it was a load of rubbish, just to see just to see how it pans out, because they're really supportive like that. But I think whenever you say to people, I think you do too much of that, and I don't think it gives us any benefits, then I think they're usually obviously pretty happy to. I find a lot of times people say, "Oh, I've been thinking that for years, and I haven't like battled against it." So when you say we're going to reduce marking of books and we're going to prioritize live marking and the way we do kind of checking for understanding in lesson and the way we use visualizers, they're like, oh, okay, great. It's like we're going to stop this, but we're going to do this to make sure we still understand how much the kids are learning. So I found that all the staff really, really positive about that sort of thing. And we're going to quite dramatically change our end of year reports, because my school still does the very lengthy, lovely, as a parent. I'm actually a parent at the school that I head at. Lovely, long, very, very long end of year reports. Now, they've done that for years, and I've never known the under the bonnet approach to that, which is that they start collecting evidence throughout the year, filing it away, ready to do this mammoth writing task in May and June. And I kind of came in and I was like, why do we do that? Like, why don't we do two really great parents' evenings a year, so the parents already feel like they've really caught up to date with progress and attitude and all that kind of stuff. We have so many touch points with the parents in person throughout the year. They really feel like they know us and we know them and we know their kids. Why are we writing like a 3 to 4 page? So I've just said we're going to cut it all right down to a really short, concise. And everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, this is so brilliant!" And I'm thinking, but why didn't we just do that years ago? Like, it's just funny how things endure, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember there was like the first deadline, then there was the second deadline, and And so you would be sculpting these manuscripts, probably put more effort in that than I did the books I've written. But like you say, as a parent, it's really nice because, like, I mean, the thing that really always stands out to me is tapestry. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like basically photographs and videos of your children when they're in reception, and they
Mm,
get sent to you. But the teachers are uploading at 11 o'clock at night, and all of these are lovely. But I do not want you working this late
mm, mm.
for something I'm going to look at and go, that's nice. And
That is the part of leadership where I go, I'll take any flack from the parents. I'll justify it to any parents who say this isn't as good as it used to be. You don't need to worry about that bit. You just crack on. The time you save from this, put into your own development or your planning of your great curriculum or whatever. And I'll take the heat for that decision. So that's when you can stand up as an individual, as a leader, and kind of shield your team from all the extraneous stuff that's floating around.
it's the umbrella, isn't it? Like, can't remember whose analogy that is, but I always remember like the really strong head teachers I've worked with have kept us shielded from so much stuff. It's almost the one that the head teacher perhaps doesn't get credit for sometimes, but especially if they do it really well, you don't notice
Mm.
that they've done it. Like a Darn Fletcher. You didn't realize he was doing all the stuff he was doing until he stopped doing it, and then you had 13 years of misery.
Great, great Darren Fletcher reference there.
In the last episode, you guys both spoke a great deal about trust, about guardrails, and the need for teacher oversight before schools hand anything over to AI. What do you think schools now trust AI to do? What should they still perhaps not trust it to do? And has the profession become any more or less discerning, in your opinion, in that time?
The thing, whenever I always start conversations when I first meet a school or a trust by saying, what are you doing with AI at the moment? The vast majority will say admin is where we've started. And they seem to be pretty happy with that, generating reports and that kind of thing. I like hear it come up all the time. I was in a governors meeting last night and ChatGPT came up about 4 times as a shortcut to, oh, we could check this policy by doing this. We could cross-reference these two policies if we did this. And that bit, I think, it's what it's good at, summarizing, checking, cross-referencing, all of that. Where I think there's a bit of a false economy, it sort of links into what we've just been talking about. When you completely hand over your marking to AI and you have no human oversight whatsoever, I don't know how many thousands of marking comments we've reviewed over the last 15 months. It does not get all of them correct. Some of them are wrong in a way that like you could probably get away with because it's not too far off the correct answer. Some of them sometimes are really wrong. And if we hadn't checked it and fixed it, we would have been saying something to a student that they shouldn't have been receiving. It's not appropriate feedback for their work. It's not going to move them forward. And that's why we check it. I think with anything that's student facing from my side, if you're relying on teachers, tired teachers with a lot of things to get through to go and check and correct and find the errors in all of that marking, I think you will probably be letting feedback slip through that's not as good as perhaps what that teacher might have done if they hadn't have had something there that they could go, yeah, that'll do. Their first go would have been better. So I think it's definitely discernment required around giving students completely AI generated resources. And I do see increasingly on sort of message boards and things, students themselves posting things from their teacher and saying, what is this? My teacher's just AI generated this worksheet and it's completely wrong. And all getting very angry about it.
The guardrails is interesting because it has to be really purposeful. In order to use appropriate guardrails, there has to be a level of intent and understanding about what you're trying to achieve in order to make it work in any way that's useful, right? So these models are called language models for a reason. And there's this concept signal, which is big in sort of information theory, but basically what we're talking about here is a form of information. Language carries signal in the same way as a radio signal carries signal. But if you think about it in that way, fundamentally, when you use a language model to process an input, it's doing one of three things: sort of aggregating or summarizing a lot of signal into a smaller amount of content, hopefully in a way that makes it more useful or it's denser. But doesn't always work out like that. If the prompt is bad, for example, it might do a really not useful summary, summarize the wrong bits. It might be translation. So that simply it could be a different language, but it could be another way of saying this, or using this context, adapt it so that it's the same thing, only, say it like I'm five or whatever, right? And then there's expansion. And in a way, as long as you're happy for the expansion to be driven by the corpus of the internet that drives these models, then it's actually they are good at doing that. It's just that you're less in control of it. When we look at assessment, which is largely what, so obviously the summarization would be, what assessment uses. Expansion is what resource generation uses, for instance. If you've not got enough context in the resource side, then you'll end up with a lot of conflation. And equally, if you've not got a good enough focusing lens when you use the summarization side, then you'll end up with a wrong part of it being recorded. But it is also, by the way, why it's easier to say what the grade is going to be rather than what all the individual parts of a piece of writing are. And so, obviously, for those who are listening who don't know, we're all about that. Stylus is all about the granularity and 100 features that you could possibly think of to assess a piece of writing on, and what it gets for each of those, rather than saying the summative output. Now, I go into this level of detail because when it comes to what is actually useful for teachers, school leaders, and so on, you can always go back to this fundamental principle, really. So there are things that there's a lot of trust in, and I think very sensibly, like, for example, policy document creation, which is actually just translation. So you've got, lots of templates and then a specific instance of a school, and then creating your own version of that is really easy, and they're very accurate. Creating a letter to a parent, all of these, there's a lot of senior staff, I mean, in a sense, it's kind of office work, right? And that is something that they're now just really, really adept at completing. All very sensible. Trust seems to have gone through the roof on that. It's just a given that you'd be doing that. And I think probably quite sensibly. Whereas with assessment, and even with resource generation, to be honest, one of the things you'd need to be doing, the point in guardrails is that you know what the output needs to be, and you're putting detail into the focusing lens on the one hand, or the kind of expansion mechanism on the other, right? But the only way that you know whether those guardrails are being successful is if you evaluate it in some way. You say, did we get the right output? And so that's what we've devoutly spent our last 2 years, working on Stylus doing in every case. But it's really hard to do. You have to quantify it, even if it's qualitative. Did this change to my guardrails make it better or worse, and so on. Now, comes back to what I was saying a minute ago about under and overconfident, right? With these models, because those we often hear. In fact, there was an unnamed presentation from an unnamed trust we saw recently that they've done, and are open sourcing an assessment approach, and I think that's. Well, actually, we don't know because we haven't seen the evaluation. So I was about to say something very unfair. It could be absolutely brilliant. One thing I would say is, and that we often say when people say, "Can we change the rubric? How do we, make the assessments bespoke and so on?" We always say you can't, and the reason for that is we've continued to improve these things to a point where over 18 months it's got to a level of quality that we're happy with at scale. If you change anything about it, you go right the way back to day one, and it won't produce anything that is of any quality, in the way that Hannah was saying a minute ago. And that's true of any of these processes. So there are, definitely ways where, particularly, the leaders who are embedding some assessment practices that haven't had this level of focus on on evaluating the output, might be perpetuating a lot of wrong signal.
My experience, everybody thinks their sequence or their rubric is best, even though they're all doing much the same thing, and just trust the experts sometimes. But I think, I mean, like whenever I see, I've seen a few trust level documents that open about AI, and they open with, we acknowledge the overwhelming potential of artificial intelligence in education. And my first question is, well, did AI write this itself? Because I'm very confident about the about the quality. But I mean, it sounds like there's actually a lot of thought going on, and I think on a departmental level, there's certainly a lot of thought about that trust. And even over the last 12 months, we've seen a real shift, quite a positive shift towards over security. You know, maybe, Dominic, we discussed how you guys were both in favor and ahead of that because you know that aligned with your sort of outlook on things. So I think that makes total sense.
There was an example from this morning actually of a school that got in touch with our support team because they'd had a year 4 child get a bit upset because they thought their name was going to be given to AI when they got our feedback. And the answer to that is on one level very straightforward because we use codes for exactly that reason. We anonymize all the work before it's sent off for marking. So we can email straight back and say, you can reassure them their name will not be shared with AI. But it sparked this bigger conversation about how do we talk to children about this? Because it's all very well saying to teachers, like, you can trust it here and you can't trust it there. But if you're a child growing up in this world where you're never quite sure what's real and what's not, and maybe there's an AI generated version of your teacher giving advice that might not be quite the same as what your real teacher would say, and you get a little bit of that sense of the uncanny. How do you navigate that? And what we've decided is we're going to write a letter to children. We're going to draft a letter that explains, like, hi, we're stylists. This is how it works. We already have very strict guardrails in place for the feedback itself. It says the AI is not allowed to pretend to be human. So if there's even a sniff of I really liked it when, what went well, that's removed straight away because we do not want to give that impression. But we're thinking, we want to explain to children the AI is here to mark the things that can be spotted in writing that you could improve. Your teacher is the one who will tell you if they enjoyed it. They're the one who will tell you if they thought that you'd made loads of progress from last time and they could really see that you tried hard on that piece and you had really great conversations about it. And we're thinking we might also back that up with a video where I can literally say, I'm Hannah, I'm the director of schools here, I'm the person who's working on this curriculum. This is how we've set it up. This is what will be AI. This is what will be human. And bring it right back to that level of the people who really need to trust it are the children who are going to be the ones navigating this for probably the rest of their lives. And we want to give them a good sense of how to cope with that change too.
That's very kind because obviously the answer is your data's already out there, son.
Again, not a pull-out quote we're going to choose from.
Well, what you should do is you should use an artificial intelligent agent to do that I'm the human and we're here to support you thing to see if anyone notices.
You are safe. We are stylists. Terrifying.
Yeah, I had a scam call and you could, the pause. I mean, it was quite believable, but the pause in between when it was thinking about his answers. And I thought, what does it feel like to be a robot? I'm trying to give it like a Turing test kind of thing. And it was all very well spotted.
Did you? Well done. That's fun. And it then gave the game up, did it?
Yeah, it kept pushing whatever it was trying to sell because it was talking about a phone contract that with a company I've never been signed up for. So that was also a red flag. But if it hadn't paused, it wasn't a million miles off the cadence of a human being on the phone. I can see how a lot of people could be fooled, particularly those who are not tech savvy. A conversation for another day. We're going to look at metacognition in writing, and it always makes sense to start with definitions. What do we mean when we say metacognition in writing?
Yeah, and I suppose it would probably make even more sense to just zoom out even further for a moment and just talk about metacognition and cognition more generally, and then zoom back in and talk about metacognition in writing. And I think whenever we talk about metacognition and cognition in training, we tend to draw a lot on the EEF metacognition and self-regulated learning guidance report. That tends to be really useful in terms of making what could be two potentially quite complex concepts that a little bit more accessible for teachers and leaders. And so if we think about cognition using the definition from that report, cognition is all about the knowledge of the content and the concepts required to be successful with a specific task. So in literacy, this might be knowledge of how an adjective functions and basic knowledge of how to use an adjective to modify a noun. Or it might be knowledge of the function of an adverbial, and it might be the knowledge of how to use an adverbial to extend or to expand a clause to add some detail. So that will be the cognition side of things. Then we've got the metacognition, which goes beyond what do I know and need to be able to do. And it goes into how do I use my knowledge of myself as a learner? How do I use my knowledge of a range of strategies? And how do I use my knowledge of a task to purposefully direct my thinking and to monitor my thinking to support success with that task? And those metacognitive strategies tend to fall broadly into three categories of planning, monitoring, and evaluating. So how do I plan and monitor and evaluate my thinking to support myself to be successful with a task? But then if we sort of really zoom in and we bring that into the context of writing specifically, some metacognitive strategies in writing might be, and there are many, writing is full of metacognitive strategies, but I'll try to outline, I'll go for 5 key strategies here. So one metacognitive strategy in writing might be just generating ideas for writing in the first place. So coming up with things to write about. And we know that real life writers, when they get going with writing, they will draw on a whole range of sources when they're coming up with ideas for writing. So they will draw on their life experience. They might think about events that they've lived through. They might think about places that they've been to or conversations that they've had. But they also might draw upon books that they've read or films or TV that they've seen or even games that they've played. And they might draw upon that whole range of sort of sources to help them to generate those ideas for writing. And that would be a metacognitive strategy, because it is somebody planning their thinking to support them to be successful with a task. And I think that links quite nicely into just planning more generally as a metacognitive strategy, because there are so many ways to plan for writing. You might plan through talk, you might plan through drawing pictures, you might plan through play. You might plan through so you might plan through discussion, you might plan through drama, you might plan through words and phrases. And then if you're planning through words and phrases, you might also go into bullet points and organizational devices and things like that as well. There are so many different strategies and ways that you could use to plan a piece of writing. And again, that is all a metacognitive strategy. Another key metacognitive strategy in writing would actually just be turning your thoughts into words and sentences and into paragraphs that sort of function for the reader. So we might have a thought in our head of what it is that we want to write about, but are we able to turn that into a functioning sentence or actually into a sequence of cohesive and coherent sentences to form a paragraph? And oral composition can often be a really important part of that. Or we might also have that kind of rehearsal that we have on a whiteboard as well, where we sometimes rehearse a sentence or a paragraph before we commit it to paper. And again, that's all part of planning and monitoring that thinking process. I think a really huge one when it comes to metacognitive strategies for writing would be knowing how to use a range of resources to support your writing. So by that range of resources, that might be the teacher's live modelling. It might be resources on the working rules, such as scaffolds and vocabulary banks. It might be drawing upon a mentor text. It might be drawing on previous learning in your book. So turning back to a previous lesson and drawing on that too. And I think linked to that is having that range of strategies to kind of help yourself find a way through when you get stuck in a piece of writing as well. And knowing how you can use those resources to help yourself to get unstuck. And then I think a final sort of key metacognitive strategy here to touch upon would also be editing. Editing is always sort of a huge beast in itself, and there is so much to metacognition when it comes to editing. But we know that that specific feedback to improve writing is such an important part of developing writers. And we know that effective feedback doesn't just improve the writing as a task, it actually develops the writer in terms of them understanding and evaluating which strategies supported them to be successful in their writing and which strategies they need to develop moving forward as well. So that sort of real rigor and meaningful approach when it comes to editing. So that's sort of an overview. It's definitely not a comprehensive list, but it's an overview of some key metacognitive strategies when it comes to writing. And I think the reason that we're so interested in these metacognitive strategies is that through our observations and experiences of working with schools with this real specific focus on writing, we have found that these strategies can quite easily be overlooked, actually, in terms of like the attention paid to them when it comes to explicit teaching and developing these strategies for pupils. And this is something we've noticed through being in schools ourselves and having countless conversations with teachers. When we're having those conversations and teachers are saying to me things like children just, they just don't know how to draw upon the model, or where they might be commenting and saying things like pupils just get that real fear when they open their book and they've got to get writing. And even though they've got a plan that they have completed, they still don't quite know how to turn that plan into a piece of writing on the page in front of them. So we're almost on a bit of a mission to really delve into these metacognitive strategies in writing and to think about how important they are for developing children as writers in primary school. So that's a bit of an overview, high-level overview of what we're meaning when we're talking about metacognitive strategies, specifically in writing at primary.
What I really like is that it's really concrete. These are terms that we can use as teachers and in classrooms to support pupils in developing certain approaches. I think probably, obviously you guys have been in the game for a while. We would have called this independence back in the day, but unhelpfully so, because, well, what does that really mean? But, that pupil's a bit more independent. Well, actually, you've got that pupil's able to utilize the tools and strategies you've just described, Jen. So I think what I really like about that definition is that it allows us to work with it, because my worry with metacognition when it first sort of came out was that it was a bit of a buzzword and it didn't really mean anything. But actually what you've described means a lot, and actually I can see how that could be really helpful for teachers.
Yeah, it's funny, metacognition can feel like something that's quite opaque and inaccessible, and it can feel like a bit of a scary word sometimes if you haven't spent the time looking into it and doing the research around it. And I think you're right that actually sometimes, not just within writing, but I'm sure you find the same within maths and within other subjects, once we start speaking about those metacognitive strategies, and as a teacher you're able to hear those concrete examples and think about, oh, actually that is something that I already do in my classroom, or that isn't something I do at the moment, but something that I can see that my children definitely need. So I think there is, this need to demystify metacognition a little bit and make it that bit more concrete and accessible to teachers.
Absolutely. And I can see, especially with the blank page and writer's block, I think I can see how that'd be really, really powerful.
Something you were saying around the role of the teacher and where these AI tutors come in place, and Harvard released a RCT as well, and they came out with some interesting things that compared a custom AI tutor to active in-class learning, and they found that through the AI tutor they learned significantly more in less time. And then students felt more engaged, they felt more motivated, and it was like pedagogically following the best practices. But I think what I took away from that report more than anything else, because it was about 194 undergraduate physics in this one, so it was science, is the design of how you use these tutors are important. Because what it comes back to is, if you're consolidating learning at home and supporting it, it's that what do you do in the classroom? Does your shift in the classroom that, yes, we will really important guided in practice that we're going to do, guided instruction, and we're going to do some really purposeful practice. We'll do some low stakes quizzing behind it, do lots of check for understanding that that you are confident, you're clear with this in this application. But some of that extra consolidation work or something else can be done outside of class. And I think that whole shift of what happens in school and what happens outside of school, and raise the question of homework again, is a really interesting debate that I think education is going to have very soon, because there is every school across the country and across the world that they will give homework out at the moment that will be just consolidating bits and pieces on paper or using online platforms like Sparks or whatnot, and you can just click the right answer, get AI to do it for you anyway, because you copy and paste it and they don't learn anything. So for me, it raises this whole AI tutor thing almost raises the question on what is important that we should be keeping in the classroom, and what are the important what are some of the things that we could offload to AI to ensure that our classroom time is the most powerful and rich, and those relationships are built, and we really have an idea of where those children are, and we can guide them to the next steps. I don't know the answer to it. I just think it's going to be an interesting debate that AI is going to create for us.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I agree with that. In the sense of whether AI would be able to sort of completely take over aspects of that, and that means that we can focus on different things in the classroom. Because I just don't think we know enough about whether AI will ever get there to that point. I mean, the Harvard is an interesting study. But as you mentioned, I think it was university physics students. You know, I don't. It's interesting, of course it is. But when you go to, people are on that physics course because they want to learn about physics, and they are paying. It's in the States, so and it's Harvard, so a fair whack to be there, and so there is a motivation there that doesn't exist, I think, for the 14-year-old and 15-year-old who again is going to school because the law says that you need to and have to be there. I also think if you're studying physics at university, you have a whole host of prior knowledge of which you can use to help you with your physics, and you have obviously demonstrated through various sort of entrance examinations, tests, whatever it might be, in America, so, GPAs and all that sort of fun stuff, that you are capable of studying physics at a very prestigious university at this level, which again goes back to what we were talking about in that's not the case where you can sort of guarantee that everyone is going to be far closer in terms of their understanding and knowledge, rather than that. And I think, you could absolutely, I think, for humans, for adults to learn something when you have that motivation to do so, I could imagine that I would probably learn a little bit more faster and certainly report higher engagement motivation about it. I just don't know whether that's the same for teenagers and children.
Often when I talk about AI or think about AI and have conversations, I always go back to where shouldn't AI be? And where shouldn't we use technology? And where does the human bit come in place? And I'm just trying to take something that I don't think as adults, often we're in that tricky space of remembering how learning a new thing is difficult. So let's take something like physical, like golf, for example. Okay, I've got a golf set here and I am absolutely rubbish because all I'm doing is watching a YouTube video. I don't know how it feels like, what a good swing does. I did one intro, and yes, I can get a camera who does AI tutor. It literally is like an AI tutor. It will see where I am, put the pinpoints on it, saying these are where I think it's going to work. This is what you need to work at. But I need that human. I need that someone to really guide me and point me in the right direction. And I think that's important as well. And it's with all of this, I've got a passion to want to learn on it, but I don't know what I'm doing. I'm almost wasting my time trying to explore it. I need a professional guide or professional helper to help me get to that initial stage where I can then use almost a hybrid AI tutoring almost to consolidate what the teacher's saying or the students like what I'm getting told. And I think that could be replicable in education in some ways. This idea of space retrieval, this idea of some pupils will need to consolidate and practice things a lot more than others. I think that's where we've got a real hope in this use. And when the DfE announced they're looking into AI tutors, they explicitly aimed this at disadvantaged pupils. And it's from 2 points of view. One, to close a gap, but two, I think there's an equity thing here as well, because those who have devices can access free AI online quite easily, quite quickly, whether it's to do their homework or whether to actually use it purposefully. I think there's an interesting scope there as well.
I have succumbed and I give OpenAI £20 a month for my hard-earned money because I was getting really annoyed with my rate limits being put to zero within sort of 5-10 minutes of a conversation, and with all my £20, I very rarely ever have that problem. It's the same with Claude, and so absolutely, currently, if you are if you're fortunate enough to be able to have a spare 20 quid to give to Anthropic or OpenAI, um, and you're sitting your 14, 15-year-olds down and getting them to do things, they are getting more out of it and they probably have, again, not new conversations around advantage versus disadvantage. They probably have a set space for them to do it. They probably have a decent computer, whether that be a laptop, so at least a sort of 13-inch screen. And for the disadvantaged pupils, they probably have to try and manage on some sort of mobile device, whether that might be some sort of tablet or a mobile phone, which is just not necessarily the optimum way to go about it. So yeah, that exists, and I think it's really interesting to see how the UK government are going to approach this AI-powered one-to-one tutoring, and whether well, again, is the expectation going to be that they do it in school, whether that be after school, lunchtime, or are they hoping that these pupils will magically want to decide to now potentially do their homework if they didn't do so because it's AI powered. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they go about this and how they sort of measure success and all of that stuff. It's looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I think with anything with this in this AI world, it's trifecta of policy needs to be supportive of it. You need actually companies who can build this, but also you need the teachers with the practicalities of the implementation, but also the cognitive science to build it as well as a curriculum. So there's quite a few different things that need to work together in order to create an AI tutor, or however we use it, to be purposeful.